Don't let your eyes fool you. I've already painted this on a video before. Today we're going to show you how to paint a quick and easy clock with a wreath on the back. Okay, the inspiration for today's project came from our friend Heidi, who used a StudioR12 clock stencil to make a beautiful project over on her YouTube channel. We'll share a photo and we'll share a link with you so you guys can check her out. This is going to be a really quick and easy and fun project that can either be functional or a decor piece. So I'm actually using another clock that I painted so that we are getting more bang for our buck out of our surfaces. We have a video on this clock that has the planked surface, and then we did our numbers, we did our monogram, we did our sunflower. So I will warn you, this is a long project, but there's a lot to do and a lot to learn in it. But this one isn't going to take us very long at all. Our background is going to be color number 46 on our StudioR12 paint color guide. It shows you the colors that we use from Sherwin-Williams along with corresponding colors from Decor. So if you want to use the same colors that we can do, you can go ahead and grab that and paint similar to us. All right, so we're using 46 as our background, and then the rest of our stenciling will be done in 27, which is a white. So we're not using a lot of colors here, but we do have a very large surface. So we will be using one of our large foam brushes, and the base coating is going to be what takes the longest on this project, just because of the size. Let me measure this for you after I get some of this paint off this brush. I believe this is a 24-inch clock. Yeah, so this is a 24-inch clock surface. We have several clock surfaces on StudioR12.com. And the reason that they are differentiated from our regular round surfaces is because they already have the hole cut out in the middle for you, so you can add a clock mechanism to it. So we do not offer the clock mechanisms. However, we have an Amazon link. They come in several different sizes. So if you wanted to just do a small clock, you can get small hands, or if you wanted to get a large clock, you could get larger ones. However, I do have a tip for this specific clock once we get everything put together. One thing to note on this surface, the edges are not painted. Some of the surfaces that you'll get from us being cut on the laser will already have a black cut around the edge. This one does not, so you have a couple of options here. You could leave it the natural color, or you could go along the edge and paint it. I would probably do a black edge around it if I was going to paint the edge, because one side is white and one side is this purple gray color. And to do that, I would use our ink sweeper, and you would just put a little bit of paint around it, lift it up, and go around the edge. Since it is so long and the sponge portion is really dense, it is perfect for getting around the edge. But you will want to be careful not to apply a lot of pressure, because if you are applying a lot of pressure, it can bleed over to the edges, and then you might have whatever paint color you decide to use bleeding over onto your background. So that could be something that you decide to do first, and then you can base coat over it if you do get any bleeding. Our base coat is finished. We did 2 coats of the paint, and I'm pretty happy with how the edges look around it. I do see that I made quite a mess when I used the white paint on the last one. Something that you'll need to think about is the size of your surface versus your height. For me to paint such a large surface, and I am pint-sized, sometimes it's really hard to reach over to it. So you might have to move your board so that is more easily accessible. But you do want to keep in mind that you want to keep your brush strokes all in one way. So if you start with the up and down, you'll want to make sure you keep those so you don't have any crosshatch marks on your background. Let's talk about clock stencils. We have clock stencils in several different sizes and designs. We have the numbers, we have the Roman numerals, we have some that have words in the middle, we have some that just have the open in the middle so you can put whatever design you want. So we have really a quite expansive collection of these designs. Some of them will only come in a one sheet depending on the size, but the larger you get, we have to break it up into, and that's what we did with this one. This was actually a special design that Patty had made for a clock that she had made for her husband Ted like 30 years ago, I think, and she just finished it recently as a Christmas gift. So I will link that video showing how beautiful that clock turned out, but this was the clock she used for it. And I am going to use it on our design as well. So let's talk about how these line up. These might vary depending on the design itself. You will do one stencil at a time, but I want to show you what a rough fit looks like. If you are using patterns or stripes on your background, or if you have planked surface, then you might have to take a little extra caution when you are lining up your stencil so that it goes along with your background. Since my background is plain, then I can just kind of set it down here. I did try to, when I originally set my surface down, make sure that they were both facing the same way, but it really doesn't matter in this instance. I'm going to start with my lower stencil first. I have it lined up exactly where I want it. We do have a light etch around the very edge of this stencil, showing you where to line it up on your 24-inch surface, which is very helpful for making sure you have it lined up properly. I'm going to put the tape on my apron before I put it on my stencil and my surface because I don't want it to be super duper sticky. I don't want it to pull up the paint. The paint is fresh, but it is dry. One cool thing about stencils is that you can use the bits and pieces that you want to use. You don't have to use everything. I loved the numbers and the banding on the outside of this stencil, but the rope might not necessarily go with what I'm looking for. So I'm not going to paint the rope here. There are a couple of options of what you can do. We have our StudioR12 multi-masker, which is a little mylar tool that has several different shapes to help you cover up areas that you don't want to paint in. So this can help prevent having to tape off. Taping can be such a pain, especially with projects that have a lot of flowers and little details. You can also use a piece of the mylar, which we also use as our palette paper. You wash it just like a stencil, and then you can reuse it over and over. So this might be beneficial to help take up quite a bit of space. And then there is also the old school handy dandy tape. Since this is a long, straight area, you can just use several pieces of tape to go along here. So multiple options here. We're not really in a place where ghosting is going to be maybe tragic because the numbers are away from the rope. However, when I first started going to this, I immediately started with the rope rather than taping it off. So I had to stop, regain what we were gonna do, and then start again. So sometimes the taping off or the masking off can just be a reminder for yourself to stay out of that area. All right, so we are using a 5/8 inch dome brush. If you have not watched our Stencil Basics videos, you should definitely do that. We teach tips for how to not bleed under your projects, which is probably one of the questions we get asked most often here at StudioR12 Stencils. And so I'm doing a couple of different techniques as I'm stenciling. on the numbers, I am using a swirl motion, which is this way, and doing a really light dusty layer. We're not applying a lot of pressure. That's one of the tricks to not bleeding under. But then when I get to the banding stripe, I am just coloring along with the stripe. There are times that if you are trying to use a swirling motion in the stripe, you might pull the stencil and pull that stripe and bleed under. So let's look real quick at just what one layer looks like. It's really nice and dusty. Don't have any bleeding under. We do have a little bit of paint buildup right here, right in the edge of that, which just means I applied too much pressure there. So one cool thing is we only had to use one application of paint to get all of that painted. So now we're going to go back into it, make sure that we are offloading, and then coming back into swirl to get our second layer. So now that we're coming into our third layer, I'm going to switch to a stipple technique. And what the stipple technique does is it is a pouncing up and down, and it is going to apply more coverage quicker. However, you do have to be really cautious because since you are applying more coverage, you're applying more pressure, and that's how the paint is getting on there quicker. So you do have to be mindful that you're still offloading and not letting the paint build up so that you don't bleed under. So look at the difference there between the 2 layers of swirl, and then the 3 was done with an extra layer of stipple, and it really added some boldness to it. So I ended up doing 2 layers of the swirling and then 2 layers of the stippling to get a really nice, bold white. Now, we often get asked, how do you know how many layers to do? It's really going to depend on what look you're going for. If you're wanting something rustic and farmhouse and country and something that looks aged, then you might only do 1 layer, or you might do 2 and then sand through it. But if you are wanting something that's really going to pop, that's where your patience will come in, because you're not going to get there quickly. It took 4 layers. To be honest, I could probably do 1 more layer of stenciling and make this even a little bit more bold, but it does take time, and it does take the not rushing through it, because when you rush is when you bleed under. So to do the top portion of this, due to its size, I'm going to turn my surface around. I'm going to grab my other portion of my stencil, and what's super cool about our multi-piece stencils is that we show you exactly where to put it. So your 3 and your dot will line up, and then we have a little bit of etch here to show where your line should be, and then your 9 and your dot will line up, and we have a little bit of the etch there. And then once you get it exactly where you want it, you will tape it down and be good to go. All right, so the next step in our project is to add a wreath. And this is a super fun way to add dimension, some depth, and color to your project, and it can make your clock seasonal. So if you use a color on your background that really complements the decorations in your home, you can leave it up year round and then switch out your wreaths for the seasons. So you can have one that has some white on it. You can have one that has some blues. You can, where's this one? Add some lemons. So look how the different wreaths really change up how the project looks. So the one we are going to use today is this really pretty pink one. It has some pink flowers, it has some yellow. You will want to fluff up your wreaths. Once you get them, make sure that the flowers are pointed the way that you want them, that they are uncurled. These have been in a box for a while, so they are a little flat. If you just want this to be a piece of decor, that you don't want to be a functioning clock, you can leave this as it is, or you can get a round surface that does not have a hole in the center. If you do want it to be a functioning clock, I have the link below for the mechanisms for that. If you are just painting a clock and not adding a wreath, then that will determine the size of your clock hands that you get. They come in very small or very large. So if you're not using a wreath, you can use larger ones. If you are using a wreath, you'll want to measure the inside of the wreath that you're going to use so that your clock hands can be small enough to fit inside. So that is something to keep in mind when you are potentially purchasing clock mechanisms for this. So there's a lot of different options for how you can hang the wreath. If it's a wreath that you do not want to change, you could take a staple gun to it and staple it right around the center portion of the wreath. You could drill a hole in it, or we are going to use these little hooks with the screw on the end that I will put a link from our Amazon store. And I'm going to, I know I want it, let me find a little, this is one of our little marking tools, and I know I want it about here. So I'm just going to mark a little spot, and then I'm going to come to my dot on my 12. I'm going to come to the center of it, and then I'm going to come to the center of my dot in the middle and actually make my line so that I know exactly where center of my project was. It was a little bit off. And then these guys are super cool. You can just come in here and dig around a little bit and then just start screwing it in until you get it deep into your MDF. Now, if you are using a project on the front and the back, you will want to be sure to put a finger on the back of it so that you can start to feel if that comes through. You don't want to puncture the back if you are going to use both sides. So this is good to go. I probably need to do one more turn just to make it a little more sturdy. And then we can come over to our wreath and find a spot where our wreath tucks right in there, and voila! We have a beautiful clock with a beautiful spring wreath on it that you could change out for the seasons. If you love this video and want to see more DIY decor tips for your home, be sure to subscribe to the StudioR12 Stencils YouTube channel, ring the bell so you can be notified anytime that we add new videos. And don't forget to check out StudioR12.com. We have a link below with a clock collection if you want to paint one for yourself.